Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us today for this discussion of the debt ceiling in Washington update with Senator Shaheen. I'm going to quickly run through our list of attendees, and I'll turn it over to Senator Shaheen for some remarks following that. We have Margaret Burns from the New Hampshire Municipal Association, Catherine Heck, also from the Municipal Association. We have Mayor Paul Grenier from the City of Berlin. We have Mayor Carrier from the City of Dover. We have Mayor Brown from the City of Franklin. We have Mayor Gerard from the City of Claremont. We have Scott Smith from Somersworth. We also have Mayor Hilliard from Somersworth. We have Shannon McLeod from the Office of Mayor Craig. Mayor Craig will be joining us in a bit. We have Kirk Beattie from the City of Laconia, Chris Coates from Cheshire County. We have Paul McCallie from the Town of Merrimack. Michael Malguti from Londonderry. We have, I believe, Caron from the City of Portsmouth. Caron and Mayor McEachran, thanks to see you both there. And we have Dan Lynch from the City of Dover and Chris Dillon as well from Salem. So welcome everyone, and I will turn it over to Senator Shaheen. Oh, just a reminder, sorry, Senator, just a reminder, we do have some folks from the media on this call who are listening in. We have folks from WMUR, the Berlin Daily Sun, and the Boston Globe. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you all very much for taking time to join us this morning, and special thanks to the Municipal Association and to Margaret and Catherine for all of your work in helping to organize this morning. On the call from my staff, in addition to Sarah Holmes, who you all know is my state director, is Tina Kasim, who works with businesses throughout the state. We also, in New Hampshire, we also have Will Garrity-Binger, who does similar business work in Washington on my staff and also works on financial issues. We have Sarah Weinstein, who is my communications director, and Ty McEachran, who works with her in the communications shop. I think I got everyone. Also listening in is Madison Lightfoot, who many of you know, who is also in New Hampshire. So we tried to include people who we think are going to be able to help answer your questions and respond to concerns that you have. I wanted to get folks together because I am very concerned about the discussions around the debt ceiling and what any default might mean for the people of New Hampshire and the people of the country. I appreciated the letter that the Municipal Association sent about the bill that passed the House and the concerns that you outlined, Margaret and Catherine, in that letter that shows what the impact of that legislation would be if it were signed into law. It would cut discretionary spending by 22%, reduce spending back down to the 2022 levels, and have a significant impact on federal programs over the next 10 years. It would be a $1.3 trillion cut. I think looking at spending and revenues is something that we need to do. It's something that I've supported since I got to the Senate, but that's a separate issue than whether we're going to pay the bills that we've already incurred. And that's what the debt ceiling is all about. It's about saying that we are going to honor the bills that we have incurred as the United States of America. Since 1960, the debt ceiling has been raised about 80 times. About 50 of those under Republican presidents and the remaining under Democratic presidents. During Donald Trump's administration, we raised the debt ceiling 3 times without really much ado. The last time we had a major challenge with raising the debt ceiling was in 2011. And some of you may remember what that meant. It took a long time to get an agreement. The S&P downgraded the credit rating for the United States. Many people think that that fight and the Budget Control Act, which was enacted to address raising the debt ceiling, which put significant cuts in place at the federal level for about 5 years, that contributed to the long time that it took to recover from the financial crisis of 2008. Now, economists can dispute that, but I think what is indisputable is that a default on raising the debt ceiling would have significant implications for our small businesses, for people who depend on the federal government for things like Social Security, for our veterans, for the overseas bondholders who would probably do better than most American citizens should a default happen. The fact is, we don't know all of the ramifications because fortunately we've never defaulted, but I thought it was responsible to take this week to try and meet with different sectors of New Hampshire's population to talk about the concerns and to hear from you about what you think the impact would be should the country default. Again, I would say this is not like a government shutdown. This is not like some of the other financial crises that we've experienced. It would really have create chaos and uncertainty for our economy, for people in so many areas who are dependent on the federal government for Social Security, for it would have an impact on pension plans and retirement accounts. And I think it would also have an impact on our national security at a time when we're competing with China and Russia to have the United States default on our debt. I think is really incomprehensible. But I wanted to talk to all of you because I'm very concerned about the circumstances around that we're facing as we look at this final 10 days or so before the Treasury Secretary says we are looking at a potential of not being able to pay our bills. And that is we have a situation that is probably even more problematic than in 2011 because we have a much narrower majority in the House with a speaker who has indicated that he has a need to respond to the Freedom Caucus members who elected him. We have a president who's in a different position than President Obama was in 2011. And we have a majority leader in the Senate and who is in a different position than Mitch McConnell was in 2011, and a Democratic majority that is smaller. So in the Senate. So the circumstances are very challenging. And again, I wanted to make sure that you all know what's being done and what the implications might be. And that's why we have Will and Tina on to talk about some of the history and some of what we believe might happen should there be a default. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully this is going to get worked out. It's right now the negotiations are between the president and the speaker, and they pretty much said, these are the problems. We are the people who are going to be the decision makers here. And so we need to work out a deal before we can take anything to Congress. But again, because of the potential impact on your communities, on your citizens, on everybody in New Hampshire and the country, I thought it was really important to have a discussion to talk about and to try and answer questions that you might have. So I'm going to stop there and open it up. I think Sarah's going to try and call on anybody who would like to make a comment. I hope you'll let me know what you think the implications might be in your community, because we're going to try and share those with people in Washington to say that defaulting is really not an acceptable outcome for what we need to do here. We can have a conversation about debt and deficits, and we should do that, but it should not be in the context of raising the debt ceiling and allowing America to default.
Good. Thank you, Senator. And apologies, I missed Commissioner McGlarus from Stratford County. So thank you for joining us. And Dave Caron has also joined us from the town of Derry. And we also have NHPR listening in. So we'd love to start with Margaret from the New Hampshire Municipal Association. If you could kick us off with some thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for calling this call together and bringing local leaders together to talk about this important issue. We've been following this very closely, and I'm going to kick it over to Catherine Heck, our government finance advisor, who's really been digging in on what the issues are or what the potential issues are and what we're looking at. But really from NHMA's perspective, and I think too from our members' perspective, whether it's default or massive cuts to discretionary spending on the federal level, or clawbacks to federal funding that's either already been provided or is in the pipeline to local governments, we're looking at a potentially severe impact on the services that local governments provide, and therefore on their residents as well. Certainly affecting the most vulnerable residents in our communities if we're looking at cuts to important services like public safety, food security, homelessness, and other issues that are really important on the local level, which really will result in a massive type of downshifting onto local governments, which unfortunately is something local governments are too familiar with, but would be even more significant in a situation like this, where not only are we looking at federal dollars that come to local governments being compromised, but also to the federal dollars in our own state budget, which will also affect local governments in turn. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to touch a little bit more on some of those major issues for our members.
Catherine, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. I hope you can all hear me now. Thank you, Senator Shaheen and Margaret, for turning this over. We really do appreciate you calling this meeting together on such short notice, as we have been following the several discussions around clawbacks and the debt ceiling. And last year we had similar legislative action that threatened some clawbacks, but you were able to navigate that and avoid any type of clawback. So we appreciate your advocacy in trying to find solutions to raising the debt ceiling and avoiding harm to our economy and our communities across New Hampshire and across the country. As Margaret stated, this affects everybody, every state. Nobody is isolated from this particular proposal, as well as our local communities. So hitting the debt ceiling, of course, would have devastating downstream impacts on municipalities, just as we're recovering and rebuilding and starting that process. The investments in the 6 COVID era packages that was passed by Congress really was an investment in what we realized were some of our deficits from infrastructure funding, cybersecurity funding, water, clean water, housing, homelessness, all the way to just recovering from the pandemic itself and responding to that emergency. So we're having those two competing things at the same time. So of course, without congressional action, if we run out of borrowing authority, another huge implication would be we would have increased borrowing costs in an already high inflationary time. And we rely on those excellent, our good bond ratings due to our fiscal positions and fiscal discipline, so that we can borrow money at a reasonable cost, again, to move these projects forward, with the federal government being a partner in many of those projects through the grant and award process. And of course, the state being a pass-through and a huge player in that partnership as well. We're very concerned with the idea of any type of clawback of any type of funding that's been already awarded and maybe unobligated, such as those ARPA funds and the local SLFRF funds, as our communities they took the time to study and make sure that every dollar spent was done in a thoughtful, meaningful, effective, and efficient way. And they are using those dollars, whether it was to respond to the pandemic and they've already been obligated, or whether they're being very meticulous in how they can fill the revenue losses they experienced or the losses they experienced in their budgets. So these dollars moving forward are absolutely critical and moving out of that pandemic era and rebuilding. And of course, some of the proposals on discretionary spending and those cuts would cut things like the community development block grant, funding for transportation, broadband, the EPA programs that fund our clean water programs for sewer outflows, lead pipe replacement. That's been a huge priority. I think clean water is essential. We are really relying on these dollars to accomplish that. We have our transportation money, the investments in bridges and roads that's been coming through, passed through our state DOT. Tremendous amount of dollars to invest in that infrastructure would be lost, as well as public safety grants, disaster mitigation, and clawing back any clean energy funding and tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act is another concern. So of course, our most vulnerable residents, I think, would be the most impacted when we hear about cuts to WIC and homelessness and workforce development. And we are the faces to our communities as local governments, and that's where our residents come for assistance and help. So we feel like we will be the first to have to respond, and the downshift will really have a staggering ripple effect. So thank you for taking the time to listen to our input and concerns today.
Well, thank you, Catherine and Margaret. I agree. The impact on local communities, on the state, first of all, and then on local communities, because that's where, as you say, it all trickles down to would be significant. The news report that I heard this morning, and it was just on the morning news, was that they're talking about $30 billion in clawbacks from COVID money, but it's not the funds that have been allocated to communities. And Will, maybe you could speak to that concern, because like you, we worked really hard to try and make sure those dollars were there to help communities through COVID. And I share your concern that we not take those dollars away.
Yeah. So there's sort of a set of COVID funds that are still sitting at federal agencies. That's the funding that we're talking about here. Anything that's been federally obligated, and in the case of all the state and local money, that's actually been on the federal side, it's been spent. So it's already been sent to all of your local governments and to the state. So that's not on the table for clawbacks here.
Which is good news.
Great. Thank you, Margaret and Catherine. Moving on to the city of Portsmouth, Mayor Caron.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much, Senator Shaheen, for calling us all together and allowing us this forum. I think Catherine did a fantastic job of recognizing many of the issues that we are facing. We are in the city of Portsmouth, right in the middle of our budget. We hope to be able to pass that in another 3 weeks. Obviously, this is going to have immediate and dire implications if we cannot reach an agreement on the debt limit. Just based on our borrowing power alone, the amount of folks that come out to our budget sessions that speak on the effect of the property tax rate, and even though we have reduced any increases well below inflation this year, it is going to be hard pressed to keep those if the amount of money goes up. So I definitely agree in terms of the implications to residents. My question is maybe it's unique to Portsmouth and Dover and Somersworth here in the Seacoast. If we were to default, what could we expect in terms of the implications to the naval operations, to Pease Air Force Base? These are some things that are, our community is, we are proud of our long history with the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, with the Pease Air Force Base. They are economic drivers in the Seacoast, as Mayor Carrier and Hilliard know as well. And our concern would be around any delay in payments that could come to a screeching halt if a plan isn't agreed upon, and that is going to have even further than our borrowing ability, a huge economic direct impact to the Seacoast area. And any thoughts or things that you can share to help alleviate the concerns of the constituents in the city of Portsmouth and the Seacoast more broadly would be very much appreciated.
That is a concern that I definitely share with all of you, as I understand, and I'm going to ask Will to go into a little more detail. But as I understand, the initial response to a failure to raise the debt ceiling would be to delay federal obligations, so federal payments. The longer that goes on, obviously, the more problematic that becomes. So Will, do you want to add some detail on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit that we don't know because we've never had this before. But the most likely thing would be that the Treasury Department would have to delay payments until they were able to make a full day's payments. So that would cover military pay, could cover payments to contractors, sort of anything that the federal government is paying out could be delayed that way. We don't think that they would prioritize certain payments to, employees versus contractors. That's not likely what they would do. But there's some question still as to how this would work. And the most likely thing is that, yes, payments would be delayed basically, and would get paid in the order that they were set to be made originally. So initially, this is likely a delay of a day or something like that. But as time goes on, this could be pretty significant.
So there are additional revenues that are due mid-June. And depending upon how those revenues come in, that will have some impact on the ability to make payments. So if in fact we do not pay our debts on June 1st, when the Treasury Secretary says she thinks it's going to come due, and that date is a little fungible. The rating agencies have suggested that the X date is June 8th. But again, it's not, we don't totally know, and fortunately, never having had to deal with this before. It's not exactly clear. But in 2011, when we got very close to a default, the federal government developed a set of plans. The Treasury developed a set of plans for how they would respond. And we're sort of basing our best understanding of what would happen on those plans in 2011. We haven't been told whether those have been updated. But again, we do know that June 15th is when revenues come due. And so there would be funding at that point to pay bills. But the challenge is really the longer we would go without raising the debt ceiling, without paying bills, the more challenging the circumstances would be around payment for any federal obligations.
Thank you, Senator Sheen.
Good, thank you. And Mayor Carrier from Dover.
Yes, thank you. And Senator Shaheen, thank you for bringing this forth. Mayor McCachran really kind of hit a lot of points there that we have major concern with. I cannot fathom that it would be even a consideration for not paying the bills that are obligations. I can't. And if that did happen, it would be inside of a week that it would be a tsunami of chaos in this country. And again, it's a major concern of China and Russia and the above. They're looking at us for any kind of interception that they can to say they're vulnerable. And we, as the United States, never, ever want to be vulnerable. We are leaders. And so for our community, again, we pay our bills and we will do our obligations. But when these nonprofits come to us, saying we have obligations, we have childcare, we have food deliveries, we have all of the above. And we work close with Rochester and Somersworth, and also we do with Portsmouth. And I can't imagine these people that all of a sudden shut off. And it just, I don't know. I don't know where we're headed. I don't think that in the conversations that occur with our president and the Speaker of the House, I don't know. I think it's got to really be direct. I think there's got to be a stand and say, we are going to pay our debt. We are going to pay our obligations. So with that, I mean, for the city of Dover, we're just riding along with the rest of you and keeping our fingers crossed that this comes forth. And with all the work that you do, Senator, along with your co-workers and the team, we totally appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Grenier from Berlin.
Well, as you know, the North Country is a lot of federally owned land, and the federal government has always been light on tilt payments to the various communities who host federal lands. And, you know, particularly in the unincorporated places in New Hampshire, that's a pretty critical revenue source, along with timber incorporated places that have property taxes. And any kind of delay with that really is not a good thing. My biggest concern, is the school lunch program. You know, that being delayed. You know, Berlin has 48% of our children in free and reduced lunch at schools. So that would have a huge negative impact within the city. And we also have a Federal Bureau of Prisons facility here in Berlin that employs 300 people. So, you know, that's, you know, having those folks go a week or 2 or 3 without a paycheck, or they don't have the ability to pay for contracted services to the facility would be devastating. And, you know, looking at global view, you know, the world has always operated on a dollar-denominated financial situation. And if all of a sudden now the United States can't pay its bills or won't pay its bills and doesn't look like we're a country that's worth the strength of our dollar, don't you think for a minute China's going to slide right in? And that would be devastating for our country long term if the world stops operating on dollar denomination.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. And we heard the Treasury Secretary talking about this, that the implications wouldn't just be for New Hampshire and the country, but they would be global. And the potential to throw the world economy into recession are significant. I think it's Moody's who has said if we have a week without paying the debts, that 1 million jobs would be at stake, and the numbers just go up from there if in any kind of a default. So it would indeed hand a huge gift to our adversaries at a time when we need to be as strong as possible.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Grenier. Mayor Brown from Franklin.
There we go. All right, good morning. I would put on my video, but I've got dogs in the background and you don't need to see all of that. But Senator Shaheen, thank you for hosting this. You've been a big part of what goes on in Franklin. We are, as you all know, the smallest city in Franklin. And as such, we rely on an awful lot of grants. We are also a tax cap city. Last year alone, we had 43 grants that we were working for the city of Franklin. So that tells you how dependent we are as a small community on a lot of outside assistance. We are mid to elderly kind of a population, reflecting a lot of what New Hampshire is, of course. We've got over 300 veterans in town that are relying on some veterans help. And about 85 folks elderly that we provide assistance to for housing and for debt payments. So in our small town, that would have a huge impact. And I want to also agree with Mayor Grenier on the school lunch. Over 65% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. And our food service folks in the schools have done a Herculean effort in trying to keep that going all year long for these kids. We have a very transient school population, unfortunately. And honestly, the COVID monies for the schools, at least here in Franklin, have been a life stream for so many of our students, as we try to claw back from the dropout rate, frankly, to be honest, in Franklin. So we've already got plans for a lot of our grants. Again, Senator Shaheen has been very, very successful in helping us with that. That would be a real game changer for Franklin. I think we would go down very quickly, again, partly because of our budget system. Like Portsmouth, we are right in the middle of our budget. We will be voting on that in June. It's tight. It's tight, and we're going to be looking for a lot of help. So I cannot overemphasize the impact, particularly to our school kids, but also to our elderly population here in Franklin, that default would have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Next, Mayor Gerard from Claremont.
Good morning. Again, thank you, Senator Shaheen. Just as everybody else has said, one of our biggest concerns, again, the lack of grant funding and other things are definitely a concern for us. But sitting here looking at the fact of folks not receiving their Social Security or the Medicare payments that are going to be made to the hospitals, the healthcare system is already in a critical state across the country. And if we're not allowed, we don't have the ability to continue to pay the hospitals, the physicians' offices, we may be having a more of a healthcare crisis than we've had in many years at this point, because the hospital can only go so long with having staff showing up and not being able to assist them. So again, from our standpoint, we really are concerned from that of trying to continue to get good healthcare out to our community members with our local hospital. As you know, we have a very small hospital over here and they do a great job, but if they don't have the funding, it's going to be difficult to continue along that process. So again, thank you for your efforts in trying to fix this problem. Again, hopefully we don't get to where the debt ceiling does end up as an issue.
I completely agree with that, Mayor.
Thank you. And Chris Coates from Cheshire County.
Morning, Senator.
Morning, Chris.
And thank you again, as always. Your leadership is critical for our success, especially here in Cheshire County, but I know George will say the same up in Stratford too. I've got a multitude of questions. You know, we in Cheshire County, we have about 38 to 41 grants similar to Franklin that come through about $14 million, majority of that federal. We don't know what that means. There's so many unknowns. That's the issue that we're having. There's so many unknowns. You know, there's the congressional spending requests that many in our communities in Cheshire County have received, us too. Thank you very much. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, our nursing homes. Our nursing homes are hanging on by a string right now, just barely. And if there's any level of delay in payment, you know, we have assisted living that is majority of its Medicaid. You know, what do we do then? And it's the opera. It's a little bit of relief because you told us to go out and thoughtfully and pragmatically and look at how we can best spend that money, and that's what we've tried to do in Cheshire County. Is exactly that. But really, we're concerned about entitlements. We're concerned about our nursing homes. We don't know what it means if people need to bond. This is infrastructure season. We don't know, how that's going to affect us. We don't know if you have fluctuation on insurance, if that's going to be affected on some levels. And we don't know federal inmates. We have a smaller portion, but we have about 50, on the average, about 50 federal inmates in our care, about $2 million of revenue coming in every year from that. And so what does that mean if they halt payments? And we have a program that started 5 years ago. It's called Connected Families New Hampshire, that works in the schools, but they're in the home working with kids at risk of residential placement. And it started in Cheshire County. It's now statewide. That one person's now gone, by the end of 2023, is going to be going to 40. We're working with residential treatment facilities to bring kids back home when it's the right time, but also working with families, because the schools are already doing it on their side. We're working with families to keep that child in the home too. And that's all Medicaid based. And so that would be, and for us, we look at it as a continuum of care. If we can start here, then we don't maybe see them in drug court. We don't see them in the sheriff's department, county attorney's office, wherever. So that's why we put that all in place. And last but not least, I wear another hat. I'm chair of Keene Housing. And we have multiple projects going on. We actually went before the city council last night, planning board, to talk about 60 units that we're putting in here. And what does it mean to HUD? What does it mean to payments to those? Because it puts at risk all those individuals, you know, all the projects that we have in place. It's a scary time that we're living in, that we're getting this close. And the last time this happened, didn't we have a AAA rating, and then went down to AA? And it we didn't go there. That was just because we got close enough. And so I agree with everybody that says chaos is going to ensue, and it's going to happen rather quickly if we go down this road. And we think, we look at our budget, it's about a $25 million of unknowns. That's what worries us in Cheshire County. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that both you and Mayor Gerard mentioned healthcare, because it's not just Medicare and Medicaid, but also treatment and recovery for substance misuse would also be affected. So it's those potential ramifications for healthcare are significant.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm trying to get through, folks, so if you have a couple quick questions, appreciate that. Moving next to Mayor Hilliard from Somersworth.
Good morning, Senator. Good morning, Sarah and staff members. Always good to see our favorite honorary Hilltopper. You know, we have spent the last 10 years, particularly in the Seacoast region and the Tri-City area, of shifting the paradigm of collaboration and how our communities are not insulary anymore. And that has led to great success, because that mind shift of the success in Portsmouth equals the success of Dover has led to the success of Somersworth, and has shifted again from a model of being insulary and trying to solve our own problems to instead this great collaboration, which has led to this great collaboration with the county. George and I just left a county-wide meeting on homelessness, which your office has helped us tremendously, which we have made great strides. And we know this could torpedo our entire efforts, which will leave, again, each one of these cities and towns standing on their own to try to solve problems, which ultimately leads to turning our citizens away because we simply won't have the resources. We know this is volatile, and while collaboration and cooperation is the most important key element of success in government, we know sometimes it's the hardest. And if Portsmouth fails, Dover will fail. If Dover fails, Somersworth will fail. And it will literally go to that domino effect that quickly. Instead, we want to continue to lead to these great successes. We want to make sure that the work that George has done at the county level of bringing the county together and being able to solve problems that we can on our own continues, that the collaboration of the Tri-City Network continues. And really, without the success of us being able to carry on and meet our obligations and needs, this won't happen. So thank you for your efforts in continuing to lead the good fight down there in Washington. This is something that we must be successful on.
Thank you. I agree. I'm sorry, I have allergies, and so it's that time of year.
No worries. Thank you, Mayor Hilliard. Michael Malaguti from the town of Londonderry would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, good morning, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on this issue and for everything that you do and continue to do for Londonderry. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is Londonderry is booming right now in terms of economic development. Commercial industrial users are lining up to come to town, and all of that growth really allows us to, in the end, collect less tax revenue from our residential taxpayers. And if there is a recession that's caused by a default, or if a recession that was going to happen anyway is exacerbated, I worry about the effect on our residential taxpayers. It'll affect our other revenues. We budget about $8.9 million in motor vehicle registrations. People purchase fewer vehicles and hang on to their vehicles longer in a recession, and that's more money we're going to have to collect from our residential taxpayers.
Good point. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Chris Dillon from Salem.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you for providing us this opportunity. First, I wanted to say I truly appreciate the fact that when these different things come up, you always do pull us together to kind of share and express our concerns. I echo most of what has been said, in which case I don't necessarily need to repeat that, but in going through kind of the numbers and the possible impacts to Salem alone with, blockade, bridge aid, some of the different things that are being talked about. We're talking about significant sums of money for the town of Salem of a couple $1 million. When we look at the fact that Salem 2 is booming, and we have not necessarily been addressing our infrastructure the way we should have in the past, but we're starting to do that. One of my concerns, or the town's concerns, is essentially if there's a downshifting of some of these costs and expenditures, we're finally to a place that we can address some of these and other items, infrastructure items. And essentially, we won't be able to necessarily do some of these things that are needed. We have some buildings that are falling apart because we can't hit the taxpayers with both items, essentially. And then kind of to that, the one question that I did have for you that I was hoping that you might be able to provide some direction on is when we look at, and I know that there is no definitive deal that has been made yet, for direct congressional spending, we recently received word from your office about some possible recommendations, which includes a regional water line expansion for that kind of will help Manchester, Derry, Wyndham, Salem, Plastow, Hampstead, Atkinson. Is that something that might be impacted with these discussions, or?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer, Will?
So that'd be going through the kind of just overall appropriations process. So it could be impacted just by overall budget levels. But since that's still sort of earlier in the process, it shouldn't be affected specifically by default.
Yeah, I think we don't know. So let us get a better answer for you. Based on what anybody knows, and see if we can get back to you on that, Chris.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Paul McCallie from Merrimack.
Well, thank you, Senator, for having this call. Merrimack is in a unique situation. I echo everything that's been said before. We have a lot of industries that work directly with the federal government in the town and in this area of the state. We had over 1,100 apartments come online in the last 3 years. Most of them are with high-paying jobs in these industries. Our concern is that if the federal government defaults, what's going to go on with these industries that rely on their business with the federal government, as well as being so close to in between the Nashuas and the Manchesters. We have a lot of people that use the hospital system, a lot of elderly. We're concerned with that. We're concerned it's like everybody has said before, it's a trickle-down effect, because I cannot make another product. My product is, if I don't get the revenues, my taxpayers have to make the shortfall up, which means higher taxes, which means people moving out of town, which is not a good thing. We have industry here that rely on the federal government, and with this default, it could really force us to doing things that we don't want to do. So thank you again. And I echo what most of the people have said on this call already.
Thank you. As Margaret and Catherine pointed out in the very beginning, it would trickle down to your community and communities across New Hampshire, the impact.
Great, thank you. And Kirk from the city of Laconia.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Sheen, for doing this today. You made a comment at the beginning about we don't know all the ramifications, but one of the neat things about listening to every single person that talked today is our concerns are pretty clear, though. And we don't know the unknowns, but every one of us seem to say the same thing, which, hopefully holds some weight, because it's really important. City of Portsmouth mentioned this at the beginning. For Laconia, we're in our budget cycle as well. We're looking to pass our budget within the next month and a half. We have till mid-July. But we're a tax cap community, just like Mayor Brown said for Franklin. We rely to balance our budget on federal funds. If those aren't there, or those are unknowns, significant unknowns, when we have to make our final decisions, it either means we have to cut back on stuff, or we have to downshift, and we can only downshift so far, as any of us can. Nobody wants to be raised by taxes significantly anyhow. So that certainly is a concern for us. And then I'll just echo what everybody else said. You know, the Social Securities and the low income stuff. We're like every other community. We're fighting with a homelessness issue right now, where all of a sudden we start taking away those people that are right on the edge of being homelessness, of facing homelessness, because they're dependent on federal dollars, whether it be Medicaid or any other number of programs. That's just going to add to the problem. It's going to exacerbate the problem, and it's only going to be worse. And I heard a couple others say the same thing. We do rely a lot, especially our police and fire, on the federal grants that come through. That make a huge difference when you're getting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in grants to a community. That really changes what you have to try to budget and what you have to ask the community for. And a lot of those programs, without that funding, we wouldn't have those programs. So, you know, I don't want to rehash what everybody else said. I think it's great that everybody's on the same page. And again, I'll just say thank you for having us today to listen to us.
Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Reglaris from Stratford County.
If I can get unmuted here. Senator, thank you for having this forum, and we wish you all the best of luck in your battle down there as we try to deal with the nation's problems. I'm sure you would stand up and not allow the country to go into default. You know, most of our governments are heavily dependent on federal funding, as you know, with your history of serving people of our state. And it's just, I share Mayor Carrier's thoughts on this, and Dana from Somersworth and all the mayors. I mean, to have our country go into default would just be an act of insanity. And I know people on the other side of the aisle are concerned about spending and clawing back, you know, a lot of ARPA funding that hasn't been used yet. And they have all kinds of reasons why they've always wanted to cut the federal budget. It's been going on for decades. But I just want to take an opportunity to thank you. I think you understand the impacts to New Hampshire more than anyone. And I appreciate your leadership and your friendship over the years.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Dave Caron from Derry.
Hi, Dave.
Good morning, Senator. And again, thanks so much for your continued connection with local government. It's been incredibly helpful over the years. While I agree with all the comments made by the honorable mayors and my colleagues in municipal government, from a different perspective is that we recognize there's a housing crisis throughout the state and the country. We worked hard in Derry here to look at our zoning, and currently we have about a half a dozen projects currently in the final stages of approval or financing. And we saw some of those projects take a step back with the Silicon Valley Bank situation. Our concern is with a default on the federal debt and the budget is that a lot of those projects may turn upside down if there are significant adverse financial consequences. So although I'm sure you understand it, I hope your colleagues, both in the Senate and the House, don't get the mindset that defaulting on the federal deficit will only impact local governments. It's all going to have a widespread impact through our economy. And I suspect the job loss will be much greater than folks anticipate. Again, thank you for staying connected with us. Greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you. And thank you for raising the issue of housing and what it could potentially mean for access to credit across the country, because it would be significantly affected. We had the new head of the Boston Federal Reserve in our office this morning, and that was one of the things that we talked about was the importance of housing and the challenges that we're facing in New Hampshire with ensuring that we have enough affordable housing for people. But because I hear that in every community that I go to, but also the impact of a potential default on access to credit for people across the board. And certainly, as you point out, for those kinds of projects. We don't know what would happen because we've never done it, but it has the potential to have a real significant negative impact.
Good. And unless there are any last questions, I think we can wrap it up. Senator, if you have any further closing remarks.
I just want to again thank you all for taking time to join us. I really appreciate the work that you do every day in your communities. That's what makes New Hampshire run and so successful. And any way that we can be helpful, I hope you'll contact us. You know how to reach Sarah and reach us in Washington. We will try and continue to answer questions. If you have questions, we'll try and get answers. I know, Chris, we promised to get you an answer on your question, and also try and follow very closely what's happening with the negotiations. I hope that as you're talking to people, that you will help let people know that the impact of a default would be chaos and would have real significant negative impacts on people in the state, on small businesses, on healthcare, on all of the examples that you all have given. Because I think for so many people who aren't paying attention, who think, well, this is going to get done, and so we don't need to worry about it. It's really important to let them know that there is no guarantee that this gets done and that there are significant ramifications. And the more we can do to let our citizens, to let our colleagues know that this is really serious and people need to take it seriously, I think the more likely that message is going to get to the players in Washington so that they're going to listen to what people have to say. So again, thank you all so much. I look forward to seeing you, and if we keep our fingers crossed and pray a lot, hopefully this will get done.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.